Well, guys, thanks for joining today. We're actually here to talk about one of the two key things that happens at Advance. We are a movement that strengthens but also plants churches. And all of you guys here have planted churches. So well done. We're going to hear the joy and the pain of this. We know that it's something that is a really worthwhile endeavor, but it's not easy. And yet we have others who are interested in doing this. And so we're hoping that there will be other people who can benefit from some of your stories, some of your mistakes, but also some of your victories as well. So I just wanted to kick off the conversation by asking you guys, as you charged into planting a church, like you do with anything in life, you had an idea of what it was going to be like, expectations and a picture, an image maybe. Did that come true? What did, what didn't, what might have been some of the disappointments and some of the unexpected joys in it?
I think expectations were out for me. My big expectation was stories. I think you have a romanticized version of the stories that are going to churn out and how people are going to quickly have life transformation and are going to join your church. And, for me, it was a sense that these stories were going to emerge, because you read all the books and, you get ready in the reading. And so you've got these stories that you kind of have lined up in your mind about what are going to actually happen.
Yeah.
And I think what I found was that you sort of overestimate what could happen in a year and underestimate what's going to happen in 8 to 10 years. Right. And so, yes, those, I think, amazing stories happened. But if you're waiting for them to happen in the first 12 to 24 months, you probably find yourself a little disappointed because you're so in the weeds of this thing that you can't even when the stories are happening, often you only find out, a year or two later that it actually has happened. So for me, it was waiting for these romantic stories of life transformation and salvation that took a little longer to really see happen.
Well, what's hard about that too is that that's part of why you do it,
right?
Even for what you expect in the first year or two. So how did you cope with when that didn't happen right away or as you expected? Like, were you deep dive or were you able to kind of stay buoyant and moving forward?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of adrenaline that's pulsing through your veins in the first few years of church planting, which I think is a grace if you are aware of it. And I think that's, there's so many lessons. And for me, the self-awareness lesson, I wish I was more self-aware of what was going on in those early years. Because if you're running on adrenaline, you've got this ability to just push aside, push down, suppress the disappointments or the sadness or the frustration and just keep going. But they're going to surface eventually. So I probably am, wish I had been a bit more self-aware, able to go, that was disappointing, but it's okay. And that could have been expected. And you mustn't, expect everything to have happened in the first year. So, I think we processed, we shared, your spouse is so crucial, and your little team, whoever you've got, to be able to talk it through and go, wow, this is what I hoped, this is what didn't happen. So being able to process that with people is really important, even outside the church, going, yeah, we're trying, we're struggling, we hit our head against this, didn't happen, did happen. But verbal processing, for me, I'm a verbal processor. And when I did that became such a healing balm for the not yet dynamic that is a lot of the church planting story, right?
Yeah. When Nikki, did you guys find yourselves on the same page with that stuff, or would you be missing each other, or how did that work?
I think we were in the same space. I mean, sometimes being disappointed by different things and having different expectations. But generally, the ebbs and flows, I would say, came together for us in those early years, which was sometimes wonderful, but sometimes really hard as well, because when we're down, we were really down. But I think for me, what surprised me, an expectation I didn't have, someone said it the other day, that in church planting, you take everything personally, because it is so personal. Because in the early days, it's like, oh, come visit our church, but it's actually just us and these few little people. So if they decide not to come back, it's so hard not to take it personally. And my expectation was, surely everyone who visits our church will stay. Where else will you go?
And will think it's as amazing as we think it is. I mean, who wouldn't?
And catch our vision for how we're going to change this city. And when they were like, this is nice for you, it's happy for you guys.
We're happy for you.
And didn't stay. That was harder than I expected it to be. I didn't anticipate that.
Yeah.
And that was one of the surprising expectations that was hard to sometimes deal with.
Yeah. How about you, Ben and Lois? Things that maybe something that you weren't expecting, that was a kind of wonderful surprise in the process, or disappointments, whatever.
I think these guys' story massively resonates. That feeling of you're full of faith and vision when you go to plant a church somewhere, and like these guys said, you're thinking it's all going to happen straight away. I think one of the things I realize now that I didn't realize then was that God was not just wanting to shape a church, but he also wanted to shape us in those early days. And what you want is a venue and a bunch of people and people to baptize and all of that stuff out there. And actually maybe what the Spirit was wanting to do was actually form us and shape us, and through seasons of success, but also through hardship and slowness. And that's where real faith is proven, right? Is in trials and difficulties. So we definitely experienced it much like you guys. But I think the other side of the coin is that even with that picture of what we wanted it to be and how we thought it was going to go, there were obviously things that didn't happen or were slower to materialize than we hoped. And then there were also things that God did that we absolutely weren't expecting, like people coming to faith. I remember a teenage girl who came to faith. She'd never walked inside a church before, and the very first time she came to faith, and we were like a dozen people or something at this point, a really tiny little thing, and just came from nowhere. We weren't expecting that. We had the second week we had a public meeting in like a public building. This retired couple poked their head through the door, and we were like, I don't know, a dozen people meeting in this venue, and they were like, "Is there a church meeting here?" And we were like,
"This is it."
Yeah, and this is it. And I didn't know at that moment whether they were going to turn around and walk out, but they walked in, and it turned out to be a real gift. An experienced couple who became massive supporters of what we were doing. And you think that you're going to write the story, but it took us a long time to realize, like years rather than days or weeks, to realize that God was writing his story and we were part of it. And I think that's one of the things that was a real, like, when you realize that, it becomes a real adventure and an exciting thing. And also it gives you grace for those seasons which are slower or more barren, to go, well, it's God's story. He's writing his story. We're following him. So that's some of my experience.
How about you, Lois? What leaps to mind? And I hear the pace of things seems to be a recurring theme.
I think so. Roger mentioned the books that we kind of read beforehand and kind of these ideologies and ways of doing things that we kind of planned pre-planting. And I had very much this vision of, church was going to look in a certain way and it was going to be really organic. And actually for us, we were like, we're going to just meet in our home and start kind of really just informally, casually just meeting in our home and kind of grow that way. And it's going to be, we won't need a building because we're just going to be meeting in each other's homes, and it's going to grow that way. But very quickly, as we moved into our community and we began to understand the culture and learn more about the context, we realized that for people in our neighborhood, that was going to be perceived very cultish and not at all helpful. And actually for us, having a building would have been really beneficial. So all my kind of dreams of this is what it's going to look like and it's going to be so just family meeting in the home actually was a stumbling block for the gospel for people. And so realizing that, just was a surprise to me, because I had it's like many other plans of a man's heart, but it's the Lord who's going to direct paths, and it's his plans that will prevail. So we ended up moving into a building much more quickly than perhaps we'd anticipated. And I think, that was surprising, because I was like, hey, but God, we had a plan. You're changing the plan. That's not the deal.
Well, and it's these kind of purest intentions or these convictions you come into. It's not going to be like this. It's going to be like this.
And church planters are by nature idealists. If they weren't, they wouldn't do it, So there's, in one sense, you want to encourage that in people, but also you then want to like sprinkle a little bit of reality on top and just be like, even with all the great books and all the great models, God's going to do his thing,
NK, how about you? Where do you come at this from, and your experiences?
I think similar to these guys, there were some expectations that we went into this with. And I think for us, we basically got planted out of a church that had grown quite rapidly, and so then multiplied into different sites, which did very well as well in terms of growth. Therefore, the expectation was that the same would apply to us. The brothers are doing well.
Yeah.
The same should apply to us. But that did not happen. And chiefly because we went to a completely different context to these other contexts. And I think the mistake that we made was to think that there's a certain set of tools, church planting tools, that will work, in every single context. And it took us some time to actually realize that actually, different contexts will, require different sets of tools, so to speak, some of which we will probably still have to fashion, to actually work there, and yeah, so that expectation of explosive growth did not happen, at the time. And then the second thing as well, that we had an expectation of, similar to these guys, like burning with the passion, to plant churches and to see people coming to the faith. You expected that other people, your friends in the faith, would also burn with the same passion. And that, upon hearing you sharing the vision with them, they would be like, yeah, we've been waiting, for you guys to come, to come and let's do this thing.
You are God's answer to my prayer.
Let's do this thing, and so we approached people, friends, and asked them to come and join us, and none of them actually came with us, so that one expectation was not fulfilled. But the one that we weren't expecting to happen, what God began to do was to add to us people that we had not even known before. Yeah. So word sort of like got out that, there's this work starting in Tembisa. And one of our elders now, who's been with us now 13 years, got to hear about the work through a friend of mine that I had met at university, who did not come with us, but he told this guy, and this guy came on, and he's been with us ever since, So yeah, so that was completely not expected. That was not expected at all. But God did it. And yeah. So this is where we are now.
It's amazing. Well, and you picked up on that thing that I wanted to get into next, which is mistakes, right? We know that these things, these lessons learned, and the way that all this stuff happens can be real intentional on God's part. But what are the things you look back and you go, man, yep, if I had it to do over, it would be this? What are some of the either funniest or most tragic things that you've experienced that, you do a bit differently next time around?
NK reminded me of one. Was we came from a big church, and no church plant is going to be as big as the church you've come from. So the mindset that I had going in was, well, I didn't realize how hard it was to create culture. And a big church is normally big because it's been around for a long time, which means it's developed habits and practices and, 10 to 20 years worth of culture shaping. And people behave in a certain way because it took a long time to get them to understand what's going on. So anyway, long story short, I struggled for a number of years wondering why these new people to our church just didn't get it. And 3, 4, 5 years down, they still don't get some of the basic DNA that I took for granted that every person who's part of a church would just get, not realizing that in our case, Rigby and Sue had put in 15 to 20 years of just laying foundations week in and week out. So I made that mistake of those expectations, and probably then getting more frustrated than slowing down and laying the foundations again and actually saying, this is where we're at, not pretending I'm should be somewhere else, because I think you feel this tension that you want to be where you can be, instead of calling it what it is and saying, actually, this is where we are. And we've got a bunch of new people who haven't caught the culture. Let's take them slowly. Let's remind them what it really means to be part of a church family, and what does commitment look like? Why we do life groups? All the very basics of, church life that just hadn't been explained.
That's a massive, you're hitting me right now where it counts. Yeah, so that's really good. Nikki, how about you?
So 2 mistakes that I think I made personally. The one was not guarding my heart sometimes when it came to people. I'm just such a relational being. So I think I would just so quickly let people in, which is not a bad thing, but it can sometimes be unhelpful. So just the doors of my heart were just open, and our family is just open. And so there have been times where that's actually hurt us, where people actually didn't stick around, but we had I was planning our 20-year holiday in 20 years time with our kids. And that was sometimes unhelpful, or where we would get ahead of ourselves. We would meet someone on one Sunday and get home and be like, that's an elder, they'll definitely.
You get infatuated with a person and you think this guy's going to become an elder and he's going to be the golden ticket to our future.
And then they're like, don't come back to your church.
You never meet them again. Or they come back for a while and you realize, no, they are jaded, and but the danger of giving your heart and then taking it back, and you're so vulnerable to needing the people. So I wish I had guarded my heart as well. That's a good point.
And I think in that, actually not trusting God that He will, you tell that story of that He added the people, and even our own story, He's brought the right people at the right time, but maybe in the beginning not trusting Him. And I think reading our own wiring, and actually it's taken us this long to say, actually, this is who we are, and so this is who our church is. And as we said, we came from a big church where there were programs and events and this very well-ordered organization, and then we planted a church where we are exceptionally relational. We're not big into events and ticket sales and all these things, but we tried. And so we ran Alpha and date night and marriage course and parenting course, but we're new to the area, trying to find venues, trying to get people to come to these events, and it was so stressful, when I wish we had just taken it slow and actually just had people around at our home more and taken a little bit more of the pressure off and operated in what we are more naturally gifted at, which I think now we are doing, and there's more of a freedom in that. Not to say programs and events are wrong, it's just not our primary wiring.
It's kind of danger of proving yourself maybe in the early stages.
Yeah.
We've gone out, we've got to show why it's worth, if you're getting people investing some money or whatever, you're going, look what we're doing, we're trying Alpha, we're doing this, we're doing that, and of course you've got to do something, but do it within the strength God gives you and the gift mix, and yes, stretch a little, but I think we went way beyond and found ourselves kind of going, we just can't sustain that level.
Well, and the trouble with that is, if somebody asks you, are you going to go out and try to prove yourself and justify what you've done? And you'd be like, well, no, that would be terrible,
Of course, and you're not thinking that consciously, right?
No,
you're not going, I am going to
not.
prove to the world why we're the best church planters. You just realize that the energy you're expending is almost unrealistic.
Yeah.
And somehow it's trying to justify what you're up to.
Yeah, that's good. NK, how about you on some of that mistakes or lessons you've already shared a bit?
Yeah. So I think for us, we got planted out of a church that we loved, but which is in a completely different context to where we were going. So now what we tried to do was to reproduce that which we had just, in inverted commas, lost, where we went. But the problem with that was that now you were imposing into this new context a foreign culture. And that proved to be hard work to actually, try and get people to buy into a certain expression of church, that is completely foreign to them, and we sort of put in energy into doing that.
Yeah.
But eventually realized that actually we are doing this more for ourselves. It's almost like we're going through a process of grieving the loss, inverted commas once again, just wanting that which we have left behind, here. But by God's grace, we realized it early on, and, had good conversations with our leaders then, about, how it is that, we could hold on to the same values, but express them differently according to the context in which we are, and when we began to do that, then, things began to change. Started doing, music differently, started preaching differently, dressing differently, according to the context that we are in. And that proved to be quite helpful, in terms of just helping people there. And I think the other thing as well is just a failure to honor the work of men and women that have gone ahead of us, in those hard places, because it felt like you're breaking ground, but no, actually there are other people that have actually broken ground ahead of you, and we never really took time to consider what it is that they have done and to build upon what they had done ahead of us.
And who would you be referring to there? What the people who were from your previous church you came out of, or others?
Yeah. So there's, I mean, in the township context, there's a number of particularly Pentecostal churches. Yeah, I grew up in one of those personally, and got saved in one of those. So there are many of those churches there.
I see.
They created a certain, culture, church culture there, which is helpful. As some of the elements obviously are not helpful, and you have to sort of like strip those out. But most of what they did is truly godly, But the attitude with which we went was, we're bringing in something new, gospel emphasis.
With an answer to the town and all that stuff.
Not realizing that actually, there's a lot of godliness in what had been done ahead of
that's
us.
good.
And that would have made the job a lot easier for us if we had gone in, honored what they had done, and began to build on what they had done. So but by God's grace, I mean, we're learning. I mean, he said that in this whole process, God forms you, is working in you. There's humility that came about, and as you embrace humility, you begin to honor these other individuals and begin to build on what they have done, and God has been gracious as a result of that.
Ben and Lois, lessons learned, do differently. What are the big things that stand out?
I think for us, we came to plant a second congregation about 20-25 minutes away from where we'd first planted, and basically as a church we felt like we had some core aspects to our DNA that we felt were big priorities. So one of them was kind of having people who were like living on the ground, and the leader who was like living on the ground in that community, and a couple of other different parts of our DNA. And actually, so we ended up buying a house up the valley in that area to be able to move into. And basically for a range of reasons, like we weren't able to move into that house straight away. We ended up doing a bit of a unintentional building project on the house. But we launched the congregation just before COVID. And in the beginning, we saw incredible fruit. Like we were running an alpha course and people were getting saved. They were going into the local shop, talking to the shopkeeper about how their lives had been transformed. And the shopkeeper then spoke to one of the ladies in our church and said, "What is your church doing on a Wednesday night? Because people are coming into my shop saying their lives have been changed. What's happening?"
Wow.
And so there was real momentum and it was exciting. But then COVID hit, and we had within our team of people who were kind of heading up that second congregation, we were the most mature Christians, and the next most mature had only been saved for like 2 years. So it was a very young team. And actually, since COVID, we haven't relaunched that congregation. We're all still kind of back in the first site. And I think we've since moved up the valley. But I think one of the things we've realized is in the excitement and the momentum and people having gotten saved from up the valley and therefore us wanting to move up there, we rushed some things and maybe compromised some of our values. And we definitely, like, even now I'm like, Lord, I don't get it, because we saw his favor in such an incredible way and he was at work. But for whatever reason at the moment, we're still kind of waiting to discern his will. Like we're not able to use the building that we were using up there anymore. So that's kind of gone. So we're just kind of, and it's hard, and you're kind of wrestling with it and thinking, Lord, like we compromised some things and we rushed into it, but also we saw your favor and your blessing there, and we saw you at work. And so kind of, I think there's struggle wrestling, I think, with that now, and kind of sitting with the Lord, what's going on? Yeah. But ultimately trusting in his sovereignty and trusting that he's at work and he will speak and lead and direct in his timing according to his will.
There's definitely unanswered questions in the church planting journey, right? You wish that everything resolved itself all the time, and it doesn't. For me, one of the lessons I've learned through that process, and think one of the things I continue to struggle to navigate in church planting and church leadership, is the tension between doing things yourselves to control that DNA and the culture of the thing that you're doing. I think first time round when we planted in Tonopandi, we kept everything quite tight to ourselves. We didn't give a lot away because we were really precious about wanting to get the culture of the church right. And I think when we did the second congregation, when we then started to try and leave the first one, you realize actually everything is dependent on you and you're involved in everything. And that process of trying to get ourselves away from everything took quite a lot of effort and time. And so when we did the second one, we were like, I was quite determined that we wanted to build with other people and give away responsibility and have faith for young leaders and all of that stuff. And actually, when it came to it, that was probably one of the reasons that the thing didn't sustain itself through COVID and all of those challenges. And so just that fine balance between like empowering others, but also holding on to enough that you can lead and shape the thing to be the thing that God is.
So real tension.
I don't know what the answer is, if I'm honest, you know. I feel like I fall off the horse on either side often, you know.
But that seems a good thing to be intentional about, just attending to, managing, and understanding as best you can along the way. Well, we're actually probably coming into land here, but I wanted to see if you guys could give us some of your best advice to future church planners, those who are interested, you know, kind of considering it or actually ready to go. And it can be sort of mechanics, you know, the things of church, but also personal, family, marriage. What are your church planting proverbs for us?
Church planting proverbs. I think there's a line in one of the Psalms. It says, the horse is made ready for the battle, but victory belongs to the Lord. So it speaks of both effort and resting in God. And I think that would be that proverb, you know, to give to to say that do the best that you can in preparation, you know, for where you're going to plant, but commit it all into the hands of the Lord, you know, and really, you know, sleep at night, you know.
Yeah.
Don't stress. Leave it in God's hands. You know, do the best that you can. Prepare the horse the best you can, and just leave it to the Lord. You know, and He has promised that He will build His church. You know, as we have already shared here. You know, through the ups and downs. You know, there's been progress. You know, and God has, you know, kept to His promise to build His church, and the gates of hell definitely not prevailing against the church, you know, as
Easier said than done, but exactly true. Yeah.
And maybe I can tag onto that, because what I mean, I have these two brief thoughts, and the one is tied onto that. You know, how do you sleep at night? Well, it's as a church planter. I mean, it's like you've got so much that's bumbling about in your heart and your mind, and these people that have such a sway over your heart, and you know, there's just such a. You've given yourself to this volunteer army who are not paid, who have no, you know, measurables in what they can deliver. So you all you have is the work of the Spirit in their lives. And so I have two thoughts that kind of tie into that. The one is one's own emotional health as a church planter, to really work on that. You've never arrived, but I found myself increasingly aware of how unemotionally aware I was, and how consumed I was with planting a church, rather than making a disciple of myself and then making other disciples. You know, so church planting, well, what are you doing? You're trying to become a disciple, and that goes back to what you guys said around actually, who am I becoming in this journey? This journey is going to expose some stuff in me. Can I learn? Can I become self-aware? Can I let God change me and grow, so, you know, emotionally aware, become vulnerable with God, with others? Otherwise, you get hardened, calloused, and you can still plant a church as a you know, whilst your heart gets hard and you preach the gospel and do all those things. But it's a dangerous place to be, and he'll eventually probably spit you out, and he'll keep building his church, but has he built you? So that thing of emotional awareness, and then making disciples rather than planting a church.
Yeah.
Because you can plant a church and grow an auditorium on a Sunday, but if you don't have disciples, you end up you know, not even enjoying the thing you're building. You know, so to keep that thing of Christ at the center and making real disciples.
Not the silver bullet of advice, but the one thing that we were quite late to the party on is like bringing our kids along and making them feel like they are really part of the team. Like we planted with young kids. Our eldest was like literally a toddler. She was 14 months old when we planted. And so we were kind of like, she kind of fitted into what we were doing. And it really took years, which I think we didn't scar them and they weren't traumatized by it, but there was a cost involved but now there's a joy involved because I think they much more feel like we are a team. And
This is our church.
This is
together.
our church. We belong here. People love us. And I can sincerely say they don't have like weird hang-ups about like, well, I mean, they go to kids' church, so I don't know how much they see us on the stage or Raj preaching, but you know, they sincerely, this is their church, these are their people. And when we do other ministry or whatever, we try and bring them along and just try and, like, we are called. And so there is grace for them. They are called in this season as well. And it's an aside to church planting, but I think it's such a big part of it, especially for families and younger families.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think for me, many of us church planting wouldn't necessarily choose to live in the places that we've been called to. And I think there's a cost for us as families, and particularly raising our kids. Like, it's okay for the Lord to have given us a heart and a vision, but we're enforcing that onto our kids in many ways. And so there's a massive cost for them. But I think one thing that I consistently come back to is, like, ultimately I can create some safe haven for my kids and it could be brilliant. But the Lord's way is going to be way safer and way better for them, and living in His will and where He has planned for us is going to be much safer than what I could write down on paper as being the best place to raise my kids, or the best school for them to go to, or the best people for them to spend time with. Actually, like, where the Lord has called us to be, that is the best place for our family to be. And I think whether you've got kids or not, I think that applies on every level, that actually where the Lord is calling you, that's the best place for you to be. And you could write on paper a whole host of other things that would suit you and your lifestyle better, but it's going to be rubbish, because where God wants you is where you should be at.
Anything to add, Ben?
Not a lot. I think if I could do it again, I would pray more. I would holiday more. I'd have more time off, because the kingdom of God doesn't depend on Ben Franks. It depends on Jesus Christ, the risen one. And sometimes we forget that on the church planting journey. And I think I just want to encourage people as well. Like, the great joy in it is knowing that, like, there are people that are going to be in heaven that we've had a part to play, you know, in that. And there are days when it's really hard and sometimes discouraging, but literally people's eternities are being transformed, and we get to have the joy of being a part of that wonderful thing. And sometimes amongst the administration, amongst the people complexities, amongst rubbish sermons or terrible Sundays or whatever else, you can actually forget that people that were going to hell are now going to heaven because of the witness of the Church of Jesus Christ. And that's just a beautiful thing to give our lives to. You know, we wouldn't want to give our lives to anything else. So.
Well, I just listened to Ben and I found myself going, it is thrilling. You know, that thing of, you know, you underestimate what you can do in 10 years and overestimate what you can do in one. But you will look back and go, wow. So the whole thing of don't get caught up and take your rest and don't get caught up in the day-to-day or the week by week and the difficulties. God's doing something thrilling and planting a church, then leading one. It's just like the most wonderful gift, most wonderful thing you can do with your life. So we talked a lot about the challenges, and I almost think at the end of this, you've got to remind ourselves and whoever's listening, this is thrilling. And if God's called you, man, it's the adventure of a lifetime to take yourself, your spouse, your kids, and the community He adds, that you'll never regret planting a lampstand for the kingdom, you know.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. I think this has been fruitful. I think it's been helpful. I know I have benefited from hearing from all of you guys, and I trust that others will too. And so, we'll just trust that God will continue with you in this church planting journey, and that there will be more. I know there is more in all of our hearts to see Him do. So thank you guys. It's been great.